All right. So, as Mike said, my name is Jeff Saferite, and I have the good fortune of sharing an office with Mike and David and Joe, and it's a privilege. Some of you guys have heard that. I love it. I love being able to just connect with them. I'm sure that they get tired of all the questions that I ask because I ask lots of questions. I like to tear things apart with questions and then try to rebuild them. And so that's a little bit of what we've done at Hill City is we have attempted to learn how to be the church outside of the four walls, all of that fun stuff. The missional language that Mike and Joe and David use, and some of you are using as well, is language that we use and we try to live into. And in some ways, that kind of led us to, or it led me, I guess, to some of the work with refugees, which I want to talk about a little bit today. So we just celebrated Christmas. How was everyone's Christmas? Was it good? Was it okay? Everybody make it through any crazy family ordeals? Did you survive? Hopefully it was better than Thanksgiving if you had them at Thanksgiving. I'm from Kansas. I grew up in Kansas. I grew up in a very, it leans very strongly one way politically. And so it's always an interesting time to go back home because I kind of consider myself not moderate, but just outside of the whole fiasco. And so that's always fun to go home. But so here we are, the first Sunday after Christmas. We're actually in the, sixth day of Christmas? Is that correct? Does anybody follow the 12 days of Christmas? I kind of want to do that, but I don't do that. So maybe next time. Anyways, so today so we just celebrated Christmas. We celebrated the birth of Christ, the coming of the Messiah, and all of the Magi come to see him, the shepherds come to see him. Everyone celebrates Jesus, and then the next day comes, and to be honest, it's probably a period of time. It's probably a while, right? There's probably lots of celebrations. The Magi probably came several, a period of time after Jesus was born. But at an early age, Jesus already begins to experience life. And so I want to read this morning from Matthew 2:13 to 18. I'll be reading from the Common English Bible for those of you that are wondering. Anyhow, it says, "When the Magi had departed, an angel from the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, 'Get up, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod will soon search for the child in order to kill him.' Joseph got up and during the night took the child and his mother to Egypt. He stayed there until Herod had died. This fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophet. 'I have called my son out of Egypt.' When Herod knew that the Magi had fooled him, he grew very angry. He sent soldiers to kill all the children in Bethlehem and in all the surrounding territories who were 2 years old and younger, according to the time when he had learned from the Magi. This fulfilled the word spoken through Jeremiah the prophet. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and much grieving, Rachel weeping for her children, and she did not want to be comforted, because they were no more." Father, I pray and thank you for this day. I thank you for this moment. I thank you for this opportunity to come to your word, to hear of your story, to hear of your love, to hear of your grace, your mercy, and your journey. Lord, we bless you, and we pray that you would open our hearts, our minds, and our spirits towards you. In Jesus' name, amen. Does anybody recall seeing the picture of the 2-year-old, the toddler washed up on shore on the island? I believe it was off the island of Lesbos. Does anybody remember that? I remember seeing that, and it struck me hard, as I'm sure it did most people. I have 5 kids. My wife is MIA with one of them, who's 20 months, almost 2 years old. So maybe it struck me because I'm a father. Maybe it struck me because I have little things running around my house that resemble the young boy that had washed up on the shore. Maybe it hit me because I'm just human. And who in the world ever wants to see a 2-year-old, a toddler, wash up on sea the way that they did? Maybe it's because I've had a fascinating interest. I've been fascinated by the Christian-Islam relationships in the world. I've been fascinated by the conflict and the struggle that's been going on in the Middle East for some time. I remember when 9/11 happened. As I said, I grew up in Kansas. I remember I was actually in college at the time. I was sleeping in my dorm. So, at this time, I was not a follower of Jesus, and one of my dorm mates came and runs into my dorm, shouting and yelling and going crazy and kind of laughing hysterically yet awkwardly. And he says, "Yo, oh my gosh, some mother just ran into the Twin Towers," and that's how I found out. And at first, we just thought it was some accidental, like some crazy thing, and then another one hits. And then we learned everything that happened there. And in my perfect, domesticated, redneck kind of way, I woke up that day, I put on my boots, and I was searching for the nearest place to sign up to join the military to go take care of business. Because that's just what people in Kansas do. Fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, I never signed up for the military. Instead, God grabbed a hold of my life. I started following Jesus, and he called me into the ministry. 7 years, fast forward 7 years later, I'm in a World Mission Summit conference in Cincinnati, Ohio, and there is a missionary to Sudan named Dick Brogdon, and he was preaching and he was teaching on the situations that are happening in that area of conflict there in Sudan, and he says one of what has been kind of one of my favorite quotes from history, from church history. He says, "The blood of the martyrs was the seed of the church." Has anyone ever heard that before? The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. And he's just kind of a hyper charismatic guy, so he's already got me going. He says that, and I'm like, yeah, that's right, and I'm getting all excited, and and I can get really passionate, I can get really stoked too. And so I'm there, and he says, and then he stops and he pauses, and I'm like, yeah, so what comes after that? And he goes, "The problem with the church is that we're not spreading enough seed anymore." And I was like, whoa. I had to sit down for a second, and he pauses again, and he says, "If God called you right now to go to these conflict areas in the Middle East, would you go?" And immediately, before I could even process, before I could even think, I said, heck no. I mean, I just had my first daughter. She was, at the time, I don't know, literally probably just months old. 9 months old, 10 months old. How could I go, right? But I remember I just said no, and it's like I tried to catch those words. Have you ever said something and you try to catch the words because you knew that wasn't the proper response? You knew you were supposed to say, "Yes, Lord, send me, I'll go." But before I could even do that, my spirit was like, no. and I couldn't catch those words, and they were out. And I did what I always do when it comes to the Lord and when I know that I'm not in the right place. I turned around, I knelt down on the chair right there, and I said, "Lord, I will not go, and I tell you why I won't go is because I'm scared. I don't want to go because I'm scared. I'm not just scared for my own life, I'm scared for my daughter's life." And it was a simple thing like that. I wasn't going to argue with God. I wasn't going to try to talk myself into it. I was just letting him know, Lord, I'm not going because I'm scared. And then I walked away from that moment. And from that time, I've grown in a desire to understand the Christian-Islam relationships, to understand Islam politically, religiously, culturally. I've taken several classes on Islam, Islamic philosophy, Islamic theology, Islamic culture, different things of this nature and that. And then fast forward a couple more years until recently, I think was it 2014 or 2015 when James Foley was decapitated. Remember when that video came out? And it just kept growing, this desire. I saw that. I said, Lord, we've got to do something. What can we do? And then the 2-year-old boy washes up on shore. And I said, God, I've got to do something. What can I do? I didn't know what to do. And then a friend of mine messaged me and said, hey, do you want to go to Greece with me to visit Syrian refugees? And it was another one of those moments where I said yes, where it was an instant like, yes, I'm going. I've got to go. And I remember, I think I texted my wife. I said, hey, do you mind if I go to Greece? And she's like, I was like, great. All right, here's the dates. And I said it, and I just went. And I went with just the intention of just being present with Jesus. Being present with Jesus in the midst of this crisis and understand what it was that he was doing. And I remember I met my friend Moha. I don't actually have a picture of him, but I'm going to introduce you to some of my friends here in just a moment. But I met my friend Moha, and we just had a great conversation one day. We sat down for 5 hours and we talked. He told me, first off, he wanted to hear about my family, so I told him about my family. I told him about my wife. I told him about my children. I told him about what each one of them did, what sports they play, this, that, and the other. And then he started telling me about his family, and then that eventually led at some point in the week where he told me a story out of Syria. And we had a great time. And the last night that I was there, we sat down and we were having dinner as we did every night that I was there. And I became very American. And what I mean by that is I had to do something. I had to fix the problem, right? I had to be productive. And so I said, Moha, what can I do for you? And I said, I know what I can do. Cell phones. Americans have lots of cell phones. Do you need a cell phone? I can get a bunch of cell phones and we can pass them out. He said, Jeff, we have cell phones. And I was like, man, that was a genius idea. I don't know what am I going to do now? Like, sleeping bags? You want some sleeping bags? And he's like, no, Jeff, we have sleeping bags. And I was like, oh, man, I'm out of it. I don't know what. And he stopped me and said, Jeff, we don't need cell phones. We don't need sleeping bags. We don't need clothes. We don't need food, which is a lie. He did need food. But he said, really, the thing that you can do for us, the thing that we need most is what you're doing right now. Sitting down with us, talking to us, telling us stories, not stories about the conflict, not stories about the crisis, but stories about your family. And listening to stories about our family. Just being my friend. Letting us know that you haven't forgotten us. Letting us know that you think about us. Letting us know that on the other side of the world you still see what's happening here and that you've come. And so from there, I came back home and I told my wife, I said, I've got to go back as soon as possible. And I started planning to go back in February. And in February, I met my friend Ahmed. Ahmed was a university student studying law in Syria. And because he was a university student, he didn't have to sign up for the military. He didn't have to go to war. But as the conflict in Syria continued to progress, they began to put more and more pressure on people like Ahmed to join the Syrian military. And one day, on his way home, he was kidnapped. He was kidnapped by the Syrian military and was forced into becoming a soldier. the only problem is that he actually didn't cooperate. And so for a little over a year, he was tortured. For a little over a year, that's my daughter, by the way. For a little over a year, he was tortured. He was left in a dark room. He was left to talk to nobody but the soldiers that were beating him. And eventually, his sister was able to get him released with one condition, and that condition is that he was going to show up to court. He had to go to court to basically fight the Syrian, the military, the government, right? And so as soon as he got out and he got home, his sister helped to smuggle him out. And so while he was being smuggled out of Syria, he ends up getting caught by Daesh or ISIS. And Daesh asked, "Why are you not fighting?" And he said, "I don't believe that fighting is good." And they said, "Well, you're a man. This is, our country's in war. Our country's in conflict. You need to stand up for your people." And he said, I don't fight. I'm not a fighter. And so they captured him, and they tortured him for almost a year until they eventually kind of left him for dead. And when we met him in February of this year, we talked to him for, I don't know, an hour, maybe 2 hours. We just sat with him. My friend Tyler and Han back here were with us. Tootie over here was with us as well. And I just sat with him for an hour or two and talked to him. He didn't talk to us because, literally he just stared out into the distance, like with a very blank face. And so we talked to his friend. We found out that he was homeless. We found out that he was very suicidal. He was suffering from severe PTSD. And so we kind of made it a mission, and when we came back in May, we helped him to get an apartment. And so now, he also in May, he tells us that he wanted to change his name from Ahmed to Ami. And Ami apparently means friend in French. And so he wanted people to know that he was their friend. And one of the reasons that we had to get him housing is because he wasn't getting along with the other refugees. And the other refugees, a lot of the older men were kind of picking on him. And he was telling me, he said, they call me weird. And he said, "But how weird would you be if you were tortured for 2 years?" And immediately I said, in my mind, "For not wanting to kill other people." How weird would you be if you were tortured for 2 years because you did not want to become a soldier and kill other people? And I thought to myself, there's a story of the cross. That there's a story of the cross to take on the suffering because you didn't want to enter into the violence. Something so significant about that. And so this is our friend Ami, and this is part of his story. Next, I want to show you a picture of our friend. His name is Manon, and we call him Manny. If you look at the lower right, you're going to see these are tents. So these are the type of tents that refugees will sleep in when they're in camps. This here is snow on the ground. And so last year, when it was snowing, when it was cold out, Manny's mom heated their tent, as many of the refugees do, with these little electric pot-type kettles. And so the heat that rises off of the what is that called? Yeah, hot plate. There you go. Yeah, so it's hot plate. Well, somehow the hot plate caught fire with the tent in the middle of the night, and the tent, engulfed in flames, collapsed on him. He has third-degree burns. You can't really tell, but His face is third-degree burns all over his face. He can't close his eyes. His lips are incredibly puffed still. And you can see the big kind of club thing that he has on one hand, and he can barely use the other. Both of his hands are melted. Anyways, this is him now in Germany to the left. And that's the most recent picture that we have of him. And Manny, we just got in touch, and we have an official agreement with Shriners Hospital in Boston to take care of all of his procedures and kind of bring him back to as normal as possible. Could you imagine having to leave your home? He's 10 years old, I'm sorry. I think he left his home when he was 8 and a half. My son just turned 8. Could you imagine having to leave your home because of war and violence, escaping it? And then to have a tent fall on you, burning, third-degree burns all over your body. And then having to move to a new country in Germany where he doesn't know the language, which is German. And he already feels like an outsider. And now he has this. And now all the kids, he hates going to school because the kids make fun of him all the time. The kids call him a monster. That's our friend Manny. This here is Islam and his family. Islam, and this is Hassan right here. They were escaping. They had gotten into Turkey. And instead of crossing the sea like most of them were, they went into northern Turkey and tried to cross through Greece on the little tip there that exists. They were to the line, and if you understand escaping Syria, once you make it to Greece, you are in the clear. Greece is kind of like home base when you're playing tag. Once you've made it to Greece, nobody can touch you. You're good to go. Okay? They were within striking distance of Greece. Their whole family, all of them right here. This family, mom, dad, and 5 children are on their way. They're almost there. They can see the border. And then all of a sudden, as they're getting smuggled into Greece, the border patrol catches them. And all chaos goes, and everybody just starts running this way and that way. Islam and his wife and the 3 younger ones. I'm sorry, this is not Hassan. This is Hassan right here in the middle. The 3 younger ones. So this story really made me think about it. If I ever had to, escape and run, what would I do? Right? If with my family, well, you're going to grab the littlest ones, right, and hope that the older ones can kind of fend for themselves. Well, so this is what happened, and the mom and dad and the 3 younger ones got separated from Hassan and Hassan's sister. Fortunately, Hassan's sister she kind of fled with relatives. Okay, so she made it with some relatives, but Hassan got caught up with the smuggler, and so he's in the care of the smuggler, and they get sent back to Turkey. They eventually make it into Greece, but the smuggler tells them to give them a different last name. And so they get into Greece, and he gets onto Lesbos. Islam, the mom, and the 3 younger ones, they eventually make it to Germany. And they're trying to, and this is the ploy. Many of you have probably heard this. You make it to Germany, and then you apply for family reunification. Okay, so mom, dad, and the 3 younger ones, they make it to Germany. They get all their papers. They get everything all set up, and then once they got all their papers, they travel back to Greece to get the daughter and the son. And unfortunately, because the smuggler told Hassan to change his last name, there's no proof that that's his son. And so they go back. They're trying to fight this. They get caught up by the Greek police. The Greek police believes that they showed them false papers, took all of their papers from them, took their passports, took their all of their travel documents and everything else. Tells them that they can pick it up at the German embassy if they're really, if they've really made it to Germany. Well, so they go to the German embassy. Only the father's paperwork has come back. Everyone else's, they got rid of. And so now, Islam, his wife, they're all back together. Just last week, Hassan and Islam took their DNA tests to prove that he's the father. So everything is good, but now they have to reapply for all their papers, which is going to take 6 to 12 months to do. And now they're kind of living on the street. And so when I chose to go to Greece, I wanted to know what Jesus was doing. And now as I read the scriptures and I kind of read Jesus encountering these different people, let me back up just one step. One of the questions that is being asked, especially amongst educators, is what kind of implications is this going to have on a generation of children? Many of these children know nothing other than the life of a refugee now. And this is a life, constant instability, constant dependency upon governments that really don't care that much about you. Situations in which you have all the paperwork and everything that you have to have, and all of a sudden it's up in smoke. And my prayer and my hope is that we can capture a generation of children and that they can grow into a life of compassion. Because I think about it, if you think about it, Jesus, from a very young age, escapes into Egypt and is, to one degree or another, living as a refugee in Egypt. And so I ask myself the question, how does that help to frame his way of thinking, his way of being? What is it? Luke 4 says that Jesus grew in wisdom, right? He grew in understanding. And I really believe that these experiences that Jesus encountered shaped who he was. And they shaped a part of his being. And so my prayer as I think about Manny, as I think about Amy, as I think about Islam and Hassan and the family here, one of the things that it's my hope is that we as the church can encounter them. We as followers of Jesus can encounter them and can make a positive impact on them to a place in which there's something that happens to where they respond with the desire to follow Jesus and to become Jesus for others as well. I don't have the picture, but Amy actually got baptized in June. And he simply, he was overwhelmed and overcome by joy, and he talks about how the church and how the Christians were the ones that were constantly helping him. And people who followed Jesus wouldn't leave his side, but they were there with him, and they helped him through things. Now, he's also confused because there's also been some other Christians that have tried to take advantage of him. It's still the way of the world, but at the same time, it's my hope that we can do some of that together. And so I want to take a moment, and I'll show you our year. I want to show you our year-end video, and then we're going to wrap up. I think that one of the things that I want to encourage you by is to know, the one thing that I want everyone to know about refugees is that they are people, that they're people and they're friends, and they love to laugh. The picture, the short video of Moha, in that video actually, I'm kind of not rapping, but I'm kind of like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air song, and so I was like talking to him as though it were he and I was like, I don't remember what I was doing, but Like, he was so confused, and he was like, wait, and he's like, I did that, and just whatever, but then like, but he just like busted up with laughter in that moment. And even though he knew I was teasing him, and so like, refugees are just, they're just people, and they're friends, and they're looking for friends. And so here's some of our 2018 goals with working with refugees. One thing is, so as you've heard, we do housing. We've housed, right now we're housing 7 adults, 6 kids, but they don't have jobs. And so we're really looking at, how can we help to create jobs for refugees? One of the things that I want to do is develop a prototype freelance app. Have you heard about Fiverr or Upwork? Anybody heard of these types of apps? Well, I want to create an app, a platform that's strictly for refugees. Okay, so that way anyone around the world that needs work done, you can employ a refugee to do it. And so I'll introduce you to Abdulaziz in just a moment. But in addition to that, we have some refugees that want to open up a Middle Eastern bakery in Athens. Originally, they wanted to do a restaurant, but the overhead of a restaurant would be like $40,000-$50,000, whereas a bakery would be about $10,000 to $15,000. In addition to that, I want to explore the possibility of opening an educational facility for children, especially because there's not a lot of education going on. There needs to be a lot of conflict resolution education happening, different things of that nature. And so those are a couple of the goals that we have. Let me introduce you to one last person. This is Abdulaziz. I don't know if you can see it quite yet, but this guy right here, he taught himself English and Greek while living in Athens for a year. He taught himself photography. He taught himself, somehow he got a hold of a computer, and he taught himself graphic design. And I don't know if you can really see these pictures here, but these pictures are incredible. And so along with the app, what I want to do is I want to be able to take people like him and say, you know what, let me take your talents and show the world your talents. And they can employ you from wherever you're at. And so that's kind of what we're looking at doing there. I would love for any and all of you to join me. I'd like to encourage you to go on a trip with us. But how can I get involved? First off, let me buy you lunch. If you're interested in learning more about the refugee crisis, you want to know more about what's happening in Greece, you want to know more about what's happening in Europe, you want to know how to get involved in working with refugees here locally, let me buy you lunch and we can talk all about it. Help me network. We're looking for investors, tech people. I'll tell you, I want to build an app, but I have no tech skills. So I can't actually do the building, but I have the idea. Storytellers, administrators, business-minded people are all needed. Give a one-time donation or become a monthly partner. You can do that at openrefuge.org. Go. Join me on a trip to Athens. Check this out. You can visit Mars Hill, the Mars Hill that you read about in Acts. We can visit that while also learning the daily struggle of Syrian refugees and many other refugees. We can visit with my friend Sahar, who is a refugee. She came to Greece 17 years ago. In 2000, she came to Greece, and now she's she became a Christian while in Greece, and now she calls herself an accidental church planter. She's planted a church that has seen 60 plus Iranians come to Jesus, and now they just kind of have a house church. So there's just many different ways and different things that we can do to get involved. And at the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew, we have Jesus' birth, and then we have this Jesus becomes a refugee in Egypt. At the end of the Gospel of Matthew, in chapter 25, he has 3 different parables, and one of the parables is the separation of the sheep and goats. And I think to some degree, that there's a tying of these strings together, right? There's the literal, and then there's the metaphor as well. But both groups, those that did help and those that didn't help, said, when have you done it for one of the least of these brothers or sisters? I'm sorry. He says, when you have done it for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you have done it for me. And so I just really want to encourage you that, if you're interested in joining, please do so. And so thanks for letting me ramble on about my friends who are living as refugees and my developing passion with Open Refuge.